Okay, we are live. You can begin.
Yeah. Good evening, all. Greetings from Milan. Uh,
right? Though it's a difficult time for all of us, and transplants have really gone very slow during the recent times. But then we are hoping to pick up in the coming months. So again, it's kind of revising ourselves. I will just discuss briefly on various modes of rejection and the medicines which are available in our transplant arena, and briefly discuss its mechanism and its utility in the current times. So can I have my slides, please? I can do it myself.
Yes, sir. You can do it yourself.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes, sir. Your slides are
Is it
visible.
visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we are discussing today on optimizing immunosuppression in transplant setting. Starting with the history, scientists have long thought about the idea of replacing a diseased organ with a healthy one from the donor. The problem at first was the human body is not particularly receptive to foreign tissue. Whenever we have a tissue, we'll mount a rejection to the foreign invader. Eventually, scientists realized that the problem of rejection didn't occur when the organ donor or recipients were identical twins. The genetically similar appeared to be to prevent the immune response. So there went Dr. Murray, Joseph Murray, who did the first transplant at Boston, and it was in 1960. And these were the two identical twin brothers, Ronald and Richard. And then the journey started, and it's been more than half a century we have crossed yeah, doing transplants. Thousands and thousands of people have undergone it, and a lot of changes have come along since that time. To start this topic, we have to first understand the basics of our immune system and how what is the role of organ rejection. Now, our immune system is definitely defends our body against attack by foreign invaders like bacteria, virus, parasite, fungi, and also transplanted kidney is nothing different. We see the transplanted kidney as one of those foreign invaders and mount a rejection against that tissue. So but they can also kill transplant cells, that are host defense mechanism. So it has the major army against this foreign invaders as a CD8 and T cells, which responds through a cytotoxic mechanism and recognizes the transplant cell and mounts its immune reaction against the transplanted organ. So the immune system role in organ rejection is, you see over here, this is the CD4 T cells, and there is a T cell receptor through which the donor forms a major histocompatible complex, and that is recognized by the T cell receptors. and there it catches those donor cells, and then it mounts a inflammatory response through interleukin 2 and interferons, and that leads to further progression and multiplication of T cells, CD8, CD4, the B cell antibodies, and then they proliferate and they keep on mounting the transplant rejection against this antibody mediated cellular cytotoxicity, as you see over in this diagram. Now, how exactly the T cell is responding? Now, whatever is the foreign body is presented to the T cell by an antigen presenting cell, and the T cell actually recognizes this antigen presenting cell through a T cell receptor, and then the binding occurs, and there's a lot of changes which occurs inside the T cell. There is something which is called as immune receptor tyrosine based activation motif item that causes activation of the calcineurin, and that calcineurin again activates the nuclear factor of activated T cells, and that NFAT active leads to the cell cycle, generation of the cell cycle, the nuclear transcription of cytokine genes, and then the cell cycle progresses. There's a T cell proliferation which ignites over here, and lot of inflammatory cells like interleukin 2 get released, and through this interleukin 2 we have cascades of events which occurs. For example, there is a cellular response through T helper cells, the natural killer T cell, macrophages, and B cell antibody, all leads to the death of the foreign cell type. So that is how the T cell response in the organ rejection occurs. So allograft dysfunction and rejection. Renal allograft failure is one of the most common cause of end-stage renal disease, accounting to 25% of patients who are awaiting a second transplant. So renal transplant can fail for all the same reasons the native kidney do. So we can't say that a transplant kidney cannot fail. Definitely the same disease, same human is there. So the disease will be active in the same way, or may come as a de novo in the native kidney, in the transplanted kidney, just like it happened in native kidney, for example, just like FSGS, and cause transplant rejection. And complications of surgery is another common cause of graft failure within the first 12 weeks after transplantation. Recurrent renal diseases results in fewer than 4% of graft failure, but may be an important concomitant etiology of renal failure. Rejection is related primarily to the activation of T cell, we just discussed in the slides before, and it stimulates a specific antibody against the graft. Various clinical syndromes, we talked about hyperacute, acute, they depends on the length of time you are having on transplantation, the rejection mounts. This is how the whole process of allograft dysfunction, or how the immune process, if it is activated, occurs, and we have to stop this. And there where our various drugs we are going to discuss today are coming into picture. To start with rejection, the first part of the rejection is which we see immediately on the OT table, that is hyperacute rejection. Now it occurs hours after transplant, when the graft is just becomes molted and cyanotic. It just turns blue. This is typically seen if the patient is having unrecognized compatible blood groups or positive T cell cross match HLA incompatibility. There we see this kind of picture. Kidney is most susceptible to hyperacute rejections, and liver is relatively resistant. So kidneys, we have to be very careful in such condition, and no treatment, only nephrectomy is the answer to this. So it's a nightmare for the nephrologist to have an hyperacute rejection. Now, this is a picture of a hyperacute rejected kidney, and this is the histopathological picture. You see there is hemorrhages, and the glomeruli are totally closed and occluded. You can't even see any vessels. So this is a picture of hyperacute rejection. These are the various cells you see, and they are studied with increased hypercellularity in the glomerulus. Next comes the acute rejection, and this occurs classically in the first 6 months after transplantation and affects approximately 15% of transplanted kidney. Rejection is secondary to prior sensitization to donor alloantigens, occult T cell crossmatch, or a positive B cell crossmatch. Roughly 20% patients with transplant experience recurrent rejection episodes, and that leads to a chronic picture of chronic allograft rejection. Patient presents with decreasing urine output, there is worsening hypertension, mild leukocytosis. The expected rise in the creatinine level may be delayed in acute rejection. It may not be as fast as you see in hyperacute, but there is a rise, a creeping creatinine we see many times, and there we misunderstand them, and then if you don't be very careful, you may miss a biopsy of this patient, and they may land up in chronic rejection. Fevers, graft swelling, pain, tenderness may be observed in severe rejection episodes, and final diagnosis depends upon your biopsy. Treatment, 3 to 5 days course of high dose IV steroid is the first answer to this rejection. Accelerated acute rejection, as we discussed, this occur within the early period between days and weeks after the transplant. There's an early, rapidly progressive, aggressive rejection that is totally dependent on the T cell response, and it can occur within the first week after transplantation. Immediate therapy with anti-T cell antibody, you can use a pulse corticosteroid, may reverse the process. Then approximately 50% of cases can be salvaged. So we have to be very careful in these patients, and these are salvageable patients. Acute tubular interstitial cellular reaction is the most common type of rejection reaction, with the incidence approximately 20-25%. Typically, it occurs between 1 and 3 months after transplantation. It is T cell mediated, and injury is directed to the tubules of the kidney. The standard for diagnosis of is definitely renal allograft biopsy. Mild rejection may be successfully reversed with your use of corticosteroid alone, whereas in severe cases, you have to use anti-T cell antibodies. With polyclonal or monoclonal therapy, you can use it. Late acute rejection is strongly correlated with scheduled withdrawal of immunosuppression with therapy 6 months after transplantation. So there you have to be very judicious in tapering down your maintenance immunosuppression. Chronic rejection occurring more than 1 year after transplantation, major cause of allograft loss nowadays. It is a slow progressive deterioration in the renal function. It is characterized by histological changes which involves the renal tubules, capillaries, interstitium. Diagnosis again is via renal biopsy. Treatment depends upon your cause. If application of conventional anti-rejection agents, anti-T cell antibody does not appear to alter progressive course, and most of the time these patients land up in again another end-stage renal disease and go back to transplantation, or may require, if lucky enough, to get a second transplant. Discussed about various liver transplant, and then of the tacrolimus has come up in a big way, taking over cyclosporine. Cyclosporine and tacrolimus represent a great advance in the clinical liver transplant program as well as renal transplant program. This is how the discovery, you can say, invention of various immunosuppression have gone along. They started the first transplant were just done with magnesium radiation, 6 mercaptopurine, but they no longer are used nowadays. Then came the azathioprine. Then by 80s, the cyclosporine. Then came up tacrolimus. Then the mycophenolate mefloquine, and now we have sirolimus, rituximab, bortezomib, and the newer ones are coming up, belatacept. So this is how the transplant has evolved over a period of time, as we see today. This is a various time frames where various drugs have come to us. Now, this diagram is, I think, the most important diagram to understand the various mechanism where your drugs are working, and the signal pathways which actually these drugs are inhibiting. Now, if you see, the first one is the signal 1 pathway, the MSC peptide and the T cell receptor. This their antigen is getting attached to the T cell receptor. Now here your calcineurin and tacrolimus are affecting the calcineurin inhibitors, And if you don't inhibit that, it goes along with the cell cycle and causes the proliferation of the mRNA in the nucleus of the T cell. And then the second signal, which is again a co-stimulatory signal, which also works in the same way, where you have anti So, immunosuppression is divided into two phases. First is the induction phase, which actually works immediately after transplant, and second part is the maintenance phase. So, high induction, basically, it's a high intensity immunosuppression immediately transplant patients are given, where the risk of rejection is highest, and then the tolerance occurs, and then we don't need so high immunosuppression levels. So first part is using induction therapy, which involves antibody therapy and or the high doses of medication typically used for maintenance therapy. So T cell depletion is the first idea of the induction, where you can use nowadays the commonest one which is used is basically ATG, polyclonal antibody, or monoclonal antibody can be used as well, but ATG is commonly being used. And non-depleting inhibitors of T cell proliferation like anti-CD25 antibodies can also be used. So these are the two pictures where we have for induction agents which can be used. For maintenance, we have a total of 5 classes of maintenance immunosuppressive therapy. The CNI, the anti-proliferative agent, the mTOR, corticosteroid, and co-stimulatory blockage. CNI, it is the cornerstone of transplant program today. We have tacrolimus and cyclosporine. This is the calcineurin inhibitor we just saw in the diagram where it works. Then comes the anti-proliferative agent, which is mycophenolate mofetil, MMF. We have the entericotic version, mycophenolate sodium, and azathioprine. These are the anti-proliferative agents. So one CNI, one anti-proliferative agent, and steroid, corticosteroid, prednisolone. First we use high dose of methylprednisolone, and then we give maintenance prednisolone. And then we have the mTOR inhibitors. mTOR inhibitors have come in a big way, especially in cases where we don't have patient fit for using CNI, or in which we have problems with CNI. mTOR comes as a rescue. Then we have the co-stimulative blockade, though it has not come in many transplant programs, but it's a promising molecule to use belatacept, which almost works at various signals. So this is where we have already discussed. So just a recap of this slide. Where are the various drugs are working? The calcineurin inhibitors, the anti-proliferative agents, the belatacept, the mTOR inhibitors, and the steroid. So approach to maintenance regimen. First, the most common use are these combination CNI, anti-proliferative agent, and corticosteroid. So most transplant center use this triple immunosuppression therapy, and use of mTORs or belatacept are as a part of initial maintenance immunosuppression, and is not routine in many centers. So you can develop your own protocol based on your experience, and this experience grows slowly over time. So first part is basically optimizing your immunosuppression in transplant recipients. So what are the things which you have to think before you want to actually program the immunosuppression protocol? First, what is the goal of your therapy? Understand the principle of each and every immunosuppression drug. Know your drug and targets, basically your drug levels. Address modifiable risk factor which can contribute to graft rejection, and manage complication. These are the important parts. You have to, the thought process which goes on when you're using these drugs. So goal of immunosuppression in organ transplant is basically one, prevent graft rejection and improve your graft and patient survival, reduce the complications as much as possible with immunosuppression or with your CKD profile, minimize medication adverse effects, especially if you are using concomitant drugs with interactions, and with your immunosuppression medications, adverse effects, improve your overall patient quality of life, most important, and minimize the number of immunosuppression that patient receives for the duration of their life, because we know that it is like a double-edged sword. So once you are using them for immunosuppression, there's a one end we have the infections which are also coming in. So we have to slowly and meticulously withdraw or reduce the immunosuppression as the time passes by. So principle of immunosuppression is immune reactivity and tendency towards graft rejection. That is the highest in the early part of the transplant. So it's first 3 to 6 month period after transplant, which you have to be very careful in maintaining your immunosuppression protocols. Most regimen employs the highest intensity of immunosuppression immediately after transplant and decrease the intensity over the period, especially first year. It is said that the longevity of the graft depends upon your survival on the first year post transplant. So that's the most important part, determining the longevity of your graft. And use low doses of several drugs with non-overlapping toxicity, in preference to higher doses of fewer drugs whenever feasible. So you have to be very careful when you're using these drugs, especially sirolimus, cyclosporin. These have high interactions, so we have to be very careful, especially using various drugs in combination with each other. Scenarios where you're using, like for example, pregnancy, you have to withdraw MMF and everolimus in these patients. Avoid over immunosuppression, because it may lead to undesirable effects, including infections and malignancy. Coming to choice of tacrolimus versus cyclosporin, definitely after 1980s, I will rather say after 1990s, tacrolimus has taken over cyclosporin. Just by the thought, I think this is more of a myth than actual a sentence, that tacrolimus is more potent than cyclosporin. I would rather say that it is a clinical scenario which we are choosing the drug for. But definitely, if you go by studies, it shows that tacrolimus patients have lower rate of acute rejection as compared to cyclosporin, and that we are actually in initial part we are worried. So overall graft survival, if you talk about, see, a patient can even lose his life with a working graft. So overall graft survival and patient survival is similar in both groups. But if you talk about acute rejections, they are higher with cyclosporin as compared to tacrolimus. Concomitant administration with MMF, tacrolimus, unlike cyclosporin, where cyclosporin lowers the level of mycophenolate mofetil, and we have to use higher doses of mycophenolate mofetil in patients who are on cyclosporin. Tacrolimus, we can manage it with lower levels of mycophenolate mofetil because it doesn't lower the levels of MMF. So what is the impact of CNI over the course of time? What we have understand, an examination of kidney transplant outcome register, if you open and see that, if you talk about the early part of transplant, like graft survival over 1 year to 4 year post transplant, it is mainly attributed to your use of your CNI. But if you talk about long-term immunosuppression beyond 4 years, which has not been as obvious as the first part, then your things comes under dilemma. Current graft survival beyond 10 years after transplant is somewhat worse than noted in early 1970s. So if you want to compare the decade after decade which we have seen with kidney transplant, though we have come up with newer and newer drugs, but if you see the longevity of good matched transplant, it was better earlier. But there was this is definitely, we have to understand at that time the number of transplants were fewer. Now there are many happening. We have big program for cadaver transplant, so we have good desensitization program. So that may be the reason. It's very difficult to comment on this point, but CNI definitely has shown, if you see the overall picture, it has shown a very good response in the early period, but things are not that green when the years of transplant you see on a long and a bigger picture. So some registry data suggests that patient maintain on CNI for prolonged period don't do that well and actually do worse rather than using other drugs. For example, we'll be discussing mTOR inhibitors as well. Now, once you're using these drugs, definitely you have to know your levels. If you're using thymoglobulin as an induction agent, first 3 months maintain it around 10 TAC levels. I'm talking about rough TAC levels. 3 to 12 months, again 5 to 10, maintain approximately around 7 to 8 if I be more precise. And more than 12, then you can come around 5 to 6. That is how I monitor, but everybody have their own experience. With IL-2 receptor antibody therapy, 0 to 3 months, it's 10 to 15 nanogram for first 6 weeks, and 5 to 10 nanogram for week 6 onwards, and then 3 to 7 throughout. This is the levels maintained if the patient is receiving IL-2. And if the transplant is gone more than 3 months to 12 months, then the levels almost the same, the guidelines 10 to 15 in first 6, then 5 to 10, and then 3 to 7. And after 12 also, it's the same levels which we are trying to maintain. So patients who are without induction therapy, then we have to target higher levels. It goes around 15 to be highest from 0 to 3 months, 10 to 15, and then 3 to 12 months maintain it lower, 5 to 10, 5 to 15, and then more than 12, then we maintain around 5 to 10. And with mTOR inhibitors, we can use lower doses of CNIs, 0 to 3 months, 3 to 7, 3 to 12 months, 3 to 7, more than 12 months, 3 to 7. So you can use a combination of mTOR with lower levels of CNI, and lower targets can be achieved if you are using in addition to the CNI mTOR inhibitors. This is the timing of sending the sample. Basically, this is where the dose is given, and this is the area under the curve, and this is the peak effect of the drug, and then it comes down, and then this is the trough level, and this is where we are sending the drug level. This is the level early morning we send the TAC levels for these patients. Now, talking about the graft loss post transplantation, there are some modifiable risk factor which are immunological factor as well as non-immunological factors. Now, if a patient, suppose a transplant recipient, is highly sensitized, what do you mean by sensitized? Multiple pregnancies, prior transplantation, then prior blood transfusions. What they have is basically pre-formed donor-specific antibodies. So in such patients, definitely there is a high chance of acute, subacute, or even chronic rejection. What happens is there is a direct versus indirect allorecognition, donor-host mismatch, and there is a subclinical inflammation which goes on. And co-stimulated signaling with inadequate immunosuppression leads to the cellular immunity. Basically, this is involves the cytotoxic T cells and the phagocytes, as well as there is and persist throughout life. So this is like a memory. For example, after vaccination, what we see. So cellular immunity as well as autoimmunity, ultimately they all come together, causing acute, subacute, or chronic rejections. Then there are some times when there is a suboptimal exposure to immunosuppression or the drug non-adherence. There is a de novo donor-specific antibodies which grow. So this is how the immunological factors are contributing to graft loss post-transplantation. Non-immunological factors, definitely high age, cardiovascular morbidities, which are part of the donor. You're taking high age donors. Then delayed graft function. By definition, delayed graft function means the need of dialysis within 7 days post transplant, post-surgery. That is the definition for delayed graft function. Factors which are specific to recipients like diabetes, dyslipidemia, hypertension, infections, then CNI toxicity. Will be discussing various slides on CNI toxicity as well. And inappropriate use of nephrotoxic drugs, NSAID, cidofovir, foscarnet, aminoglycoside, all these contribute, which is, you can say these are non-immunological factors. So these can be modified if we try to reduce the number of blood transfusion, try using irradiated PRBCs or oligodepleted PRBCs, and pregnancy transplantation is not beyond your hand. But the way things which can be controlled is control your diabetes, dyslipidemia, control hypertension, try avoiding nephrotoxic drugs. Talking about azathioprine versus MMF, definitely MMF as compared to azathioprine has lower acute rejection rate, improved graft survival, and better side effect profile. And mycophenolate is the antimetabolite of choice. However, mycophenolate is teratogenic. So once patient is planning to have a baby, we have to stop this drug and convert to azathioprine. And its use is contraindicated in pregnancy. So azathioprine is preferred in these patients planning pregnancy. Talking about the intercoated version, definitely the mycophenolic acid intercoated version prevents patients having GI side effects. So patients who are having severe GI side effect, MMF, this is a version which can be used. 250 milligram of MMF is equivalent to approximately 180 milligram of mycophenolic acid intercoated version. Some studies have found that intercoated produces fewer side effects, so that is why we are using it. Now, what is this multi-hit hypothesis? Multi-hit hypothesis of graft loss or destruction relies on the theory that early in the life of a transplanted graft, ischemia, acute or subclinical rejection are replaced by CNI toxicity. What happens is initially you are trying to prevent rejection, there is ischemia, then comes your drugs which you are using, and most important drug is CNI toxin. It's an irony that drug which we are using to protect the kidney is actually harming the kidney. So harmful effect of underlying chronic disease as well, if it is diabetes or if it's hypertension, chronic antibody mediated rejection, AMR. CNI effectively prevents acute and chronic rejection. They carry the added detriment of long-term toxicity. That's what I was telling, that it on long term. That is why we are seeing these results that on long profile these patients are not doing that good as they were doing before, which leads to the interstitial fibrosis and arterial stenosis. So a short-term benefit is accompanied by a long-term price to pay. That is what we are seeing in these patients. Now, this is a picture of an acute CNI inhibitor-induced nephrotoxicity. Now, what you see is basically you see air-filled kind of vacuoles. These are isometric; their size are almost same. Vacuolization of the proximal straight tubular profiles. That's what you see in acute CNI toxicity. This is a cyclosporine. On my right side is a cyclosporine-induced thrombotic microangiopathy, very commonly seen with CNI. There you see this is the hyaline deposits in the capillary lumen. These are hyaline thrombites in the lumen of glomerular capillary loop. Now, this is a picture of a chronic CNI inhibitor nephrotoxicity. What you see is just like a beaded appearance. If you can follow my cursor, this is a beaded appearance. This is a beaded medial hyalinosis in the efferent arterial profile of the tubule. If you see carefully, just near the glomerulus, you can see, just near the proximal tubule, you can see that. And this is an electron microscopic picture showing a hyaline arteriolopathy on the electron microscopy. This is the endothelium, and the endothelial cell is swollen over here. Hyaline material is present in the subendothelial and at the site where media smooth muscles have dropped out previously. The hyaline material bulges into the adventitia, and that's a picture you see in chronic CNI-induced nephrotoxicity. And this is what you see in the tubule. You see very dry looking tubules spread out, no open tubular structure, you are actually seeing a very pale structure. This is the interstitial fibrosis, and you see tubules are all atrophied out. These are tubules getting atrophied in a band-like pattern, indicative of a chronic calcineurin inhibitor-induced nephrotoxicity, which you see in this picture. So, to summarize, the lesions which you see histopathologically in acute calcineurin inhibitor-induced nephrotoxicity, acute rejection or post-transplant acute tubular necrosis, what you see is, first you see in the vessels acute efferent arteriopathy, endothelial swelling and vacuolization in the tubules, necrosis at early stage, hyaline replacement of individual myocyte, which you are able to see, tubulopathy with small, evenly distributed vacuoles, mainly in the proximal straight tubule, as you saw in the picture, TMA kind of picture, acute cellular rejection also being a part of CNI toxicity, where you see interstitial infiltrates of activated lymphocytes, lymphocyte tubulitis, HLA-DR expressions in the tubules can be also seen, and lymphocyte intimal arteritis is another picture of ACR, and AHR, acute humeral rejection. You see fibrinoid necrosis of small arteries or efferent arterioles, glomerular microthrombi, neutrophils in the peritubular capillaries, ischemic tubular damage, complements 4D localized along the peritubular capillaries on IF. And acute tubular necrosis, you can see as a result of CNI, again dilated and flattened tubules, loss of brush border cells, necrosis and desquamation of the individual tubular epithelial cells, enlarged degenerated nuclei and interstitial edema. What you see in the chronic CNI-induced nephrotoxicity are these. In chronic CNI-induced nephrotoxicity, you see hyaline arteriopathy. Myocytes are replaced by, just you saw in the picture, beaded hyaline deposit that bulges into the adventitia, non-specific segmental or global glomerular sclerosis, striped interstitial fibrosis, and tubular atrophy. Chronic rejection pictures you can see like a transplant arteriopathy, new onset intimal fibrosis, foam cells or mononuclear cells in the intima. Transplant glomerulopathy, another important entity, you see double contoured glomerular capillaries. Transplant capilloropathy, where you see peritubular capillaries is 5 or more circumferential basement membrane layers on the electron microscope, and interstitial fibrosis and tubular atrophy, as you saw on the last picture. Chronic allograft nephropathy, you see intimal fibroelastosis in the artery, no changes on the subendothelial hyalinosis in the arteriole, and non-specific segmental or glomerular sclerosis and interstitial fibrosis and tubular atrophy are commonly seen in IFTA, what we say in chronic rejection. So now, what is the answer? CNI toxicity, you have so many problems. So do you have something else which you can offer? Yes, there is a role of everolimus which comes here. Now, first, the pathogenesis of CNI-mediated nephrotoxicity. Now, CNI nephrotoxicity, you have various mediators which are there. Angiotensin 2, which is causing renal vasoconstriction, that is leading to hypoxia. There is increased reactive oxygen species and causing chronic nephropathy. Increased aldosterone levels causes increased apoptosis, and that leads to inflammatory markers and fibrotic markers like increased TGF-beta, increased growth factors, which increases the extracellular matrix protein and then causes tubular interstitial fibrosis, hence leading to chronic nephropathy. So that is what is happening in these patients. There is an initial happiness with very reduced chances of rejection with these drugs, but on a long run, this is what we are actually witnessing. So what is the differential diagnosis of AKI in transplant recipient? First, you may have a patient where you can actually divide this in this outlook as well, having a pre-renal, renal, and post-renal picture. So if you have an AKI in transplant recipient, you can look in the eyes of pre-renal causes like acute, just we have discussed, acute calcineurin toxicity. The basic cause over here is the vasoconstriction of the efferent and the efferent arteriole. Timing most common within the first 3 months, and how you can work on, you have to meticulously. This drug has a very narrow therapeutic margin. So you have to be very careful using these drugs and monitor carefully your CNI trough levels. Renal artery stenosis, example, mechanism is trauma, ischemia, and atherosclerosis, can occur anytime, most common 3 months to 2 years. Diagnosis, you can diagnose by doing duplex or arteriography. Chronic CNI toxicity most commonly occurs after 3 months, more than 1 year, and only biopsy is the way to diagnose them. Another important thing, these are kind of hidden causes which we should be very careful looking for. BK nephropathy. BK nephropathy, viruria, which causes viremia, and then BK nephropathy. It can occur anytime. Mean time is 10 to 13 months. Diagnosis is by checking BK PCR or urine BK PCR and seeing on biopsy features suggestive of BK nephropathy. CMV nephritis again occurs more than 3 months. Diagnosis by doing CMV PCR or biopsy. Acute rejection in kidneys can be cellular or humoral. We're not going into details of that. Answer is through biopsy. Post-renal, you can have urethral stenosis. Mechanism, again, it can be ischemic, traumatic, or even secondary to BK nephropathy. You can have a lymphocele, which can cause mechanism is basically lymphatic leakage, compressing your allograft, occurs 1 week to 6 months, and only can be diagnosed by a good renal ultrasound. Now, just we were discussing about the CNI toxicity. So, what is the answer? Then it came that mTOR inhibitor can do some good, especially sirolimus and everolimus. Sirolimus is basically a lipophilic agent and a fermentation product of Streptomyces hygroscopicus. And it was first investigated as an antifungal agent in 1970. And its immunosuppressive effect was observed. Tacrolimus, sirolimus shared a structural similarity, and this was found in the next year. In 1991, 2-hydroxyl ethyl chain substitution of sirolimus, everolimus was introduced, which has better bioavailability. And by 1999, it took around, you see, by the time we see a drug and then it gets accepted, it takes around 29 years that FDA approved sirolimus, and 2010, everolimus was approved. So this is how it is working. mTOR inhibitor resembles just like tacrolimus. It binds on the FKBP or the FK506 binding protein. It's a highly committed protein to eukaryotes and is a binding partner for the immunosuppressive drugs, where the same molecule where the CNIs are binding. However, tacrolimus and cyclosporine block the interleukin-2 gene transcription. Sirolimus acts later to the interleukin-2 dependent lymphocyte proliferation. So this blockage is likely due to inhibition of mammalian kinase, an enzyme which is essential for the cell cycle progression. Therefore, the drug inhibits both T cell and B cell in this mechanism. So what mTOR does, it increases the HIF, increases the VEGF, TNF-alpha, PGDF, causing angiogenesis, proliferation, and tumor growth. What mTOR inhibitors? It inhibits all this. So basically, there we are inhibiting the mTOR cell cycle. So you can prevent, mTOR can cause glomerular hypertrophy, you can prevent glomerular hypertrophy, you can prevent pro-inflammatory cytokine, interstitial inflammation, fibroblast proliferation, and then you can prevent the progression of chronic graft dysfunction. That is how you can use this drug. And this was a study, basically it measured the biopsy proven rejection at month 12 post-transplant in transplant recipient, which was randomized in comparative studies to everolimus targeting a C0 of 3 to 8 nanogram per ml. And you see various combination where everolimus plus low CNI was used, everolimus with very low CNI was used, standard CNI, and MMF and standard CNI was used. In first study, which was A2309 kidney transplant study, where we saw that actually MMF with standard CNI had higher chances of rejection as compared to everolimus with low CNI combination. Another study, ACID study, where we saw that your everolimus with very low CNI had definitely higher chances, higher percentage of biopsy proven rejection as compared to everolimus with low CNI. So very low CNI may not be very efficient in these patients. Then another study, which was a liver transplant study, where it was seen that standard CNI alone had higher incidence of rejection as compared to everolimus with low CNI. And A2310, which was a heart transplant study, which showed that percentage of patients which biopsy proven rejection was higher in patients having MMF and standard CNI as compared to everolimus and low CNI. This is what these studies actually told us. So everolimus in patients with cancer risk. We know that transplant patients have higher incidence of new onset both skin and solid organ cancers that do age matched cohorts. And with the study which I just mentioned, A2309 study, revealed a reduced, although not statistically significant, incidence of neoplasm after 12 months of everolimus study. So everolimus actually helped in this patient in reducing the incidence, though it was not statistically significant post-transplant neoplasm. A change in the therapy from CNI to mTOR inhibitor is associated with significant lower malignancy at the rate of at the malignancy rate at 2 years. So that was also seen. For solid organ cancer, good data suggests that mTOR inhibitor is associated with fewer de novo malignancy compared to CNI. So as seen for a cancer profile of these patients, everolimus is a better option as compared to CNI. In non-melanoma skin cancers, the use of CNI was associated with statistically reduced incidence of squamous cell carcinoma and numerically but not statistically significant reduction in incidence of basal cell carcinoma. Patients using on CNI who have a history of solid organ or skin malignancy, particularly non-melanoma skin cancer, would benefit significantly from switch to a mTOR inhibitor such as everolimus. So such a switch also may benefit patients at high risk of CMV disease as well. So what are the guidelines which recommends the use of mTOR inhibitor? For patients with chronic allograft injury, a histological evidence of CNI toxicity, KDOGI recommends or suggests reducing, withdrawing or replacing the CNI. For patients with chronic allograft injury, GFR more than 40 and urine protein is excretion less than 500 milligram per gram creatinine, this suggestion is more valid using mTOR instead of CNI. So to summarize, patient using CNI who have a history of solid organ or skin malignancy, particularly non-melanoma skin cancer, would benefit significantly from a switch to mTOR inhibitor such as everolimus. So such a switch also may benefit patients at high risk of CMV disease. CNI therapy is associated with abnormal lipid profile like increase in triglyceride, total cholesterol, reduced HDL, and to a chance to treatment with the mTOR inhibitor may reduce the risk of developing cardiovascular disease also, and it's anti-proliferative agent, so it can actually retard, it may retard the progression of CKD in chronic allograft injuries. Now, patients who are intolerant to CNI therapy, who suffer from nephrotoxic side effect, would definitely benefit for such a switch. And patients who would not benefit from a such switch from CNI to mTOR inhibitor, induce those at high immunological risk. The mTOR are less immunosuppressive than CNI. This thing we have to keep in mind. Now, we cannot play around with these drugs, especially when there is a losing graft function. So if you want to weigh the benefit of CNI, you have to weigh the benefit of CNI in terms of rejection. But if you see that if your clinical profile of the patient is good, your rejections are under control, you don't have that much of proteinuria, this thought can be a worth of switching these drugs by 6 months to 1 year period to mTOR inhibitor. So renal transplant patient with poor graft function, proteinuria, lung disease, and those at risk for new onset diabetes, another problem with CNI, would not benefit from switch to mTOR inhibitor. They will definitely not do good, because once you have proteinuria, mTOR may progress the proteinuria and we cannot use in those scenarios. So This is a picture of kidney graft. After this patient's donor graft nephrectomy, various tissues are being dissected. Now, this is the ureter, and this is the renal artery, and that is how the initial dissection is done before engraftment. And this is the perfusion, which is TK solution, which we are doing into the renal artery. We have to perfuse it well before we do the engraftment. And this is after engraftment. You see the pale kidney suddenly has turned completely red, and this is the ureter, and you can see the urine there, and that is life. So once you see this, I think everybody's happiness comes on the face once they see the active urine coming out of the engrafted kidney. And this is our transplant patient who underwent a successful transplant. Wife, it was a O2B group. A wife donated kidney, and I put the picture because today is completed 1 year of his transplant, and his creatinine is at 1.1, doing very well. So today he called up, so I thought of putting this picture to you. So thank you very much, and definitely it is the biggest discovery, it's the biggest achievement of the century. Transplantation, life can re-begin after a jolt, after a setback, because you understand that kidney patients undergoing transplant, what agony, what to financially family and the patient faces. He loses his job, he loses his family, but then after a successful transplant, things can re-begin again. So we have to encourage it in a proper way. So I leave it to the audience for the questions. Over to you.
Yes. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Vishway Kumar, for the wonderful and detailed deliberation. And to share with you, sir, we are flooded with lots of query and the question from across the country. So I'd like to take the one by one and request you to address those query accordingly. Sir, there is a question. What are the dosing regimen that you consider for tacrolimus for transplant recipient?
Tacrolimus, actually, I'm telling what we are following in our transplant unit. Now, once a patient is admitted in our hospital, usually we admit on day -2. So our protocol, we start the patient on tacrolimus on day -2 as well. So that time we start with 0.15 milligram per kg per day in 2 divided dose. And we continue this throughout the transplant, and then on day 2 post transplant we send the TAC level, trough levels of that, and then we decide the dose, how to maintaining around TAC level of around 10. We decide further how to go around the further dosing, but the start dose is around we start at 0.15 milligram per kg per day in 2 divided doses.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question from Dr. Manjari Sharma from Guwahati. In this pandemic situation, what are the precautions that would be beneficial for the transplanted patient?
See, precautions universally, what we are applying to most patients is the same. The hand hygiene, use of mask, and isolation, all those things are most important thing. We are checking the COVID profile at the period of transplant workup, and also just before admission via surgery, we are also rechecking the COVID profile and trying maintaining the proper isolation protocols for transplant. We are not using any prophylactic drugs as such for transplant patients, but it's almost that is how we are following the transplantation. Over the period of COVID, we have not done much transplant. So to be very frank to you, we don't have much experience during last 6 months. But that is how we are planning to progress in our transplant program.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question from Dr. Bikas Rai from Muzaffarpur. Sir, if the TAC level is 1.5 in patient, suggest me what is the safe dose for this patient?
What is the duration from post-transplant? Are you checking this TAC level? That is most important part. But 1.5 is definitely too low. So in all set, you have to see the other profile as well. Many times TAC levels is very deceptive. Now there are many prerequisites. The patient has to go to the lab. It has to be taken fresh in the lab itself. It should not be on a long travel zone. The blood is being carried, and you should do proper trough. The timing should be perfect. And if you have this level of 1.5, definitely you have to increase the dose of your tacrolimus medicine. If you suppose, I don't know what dose the patient that time was, but definitely you have to increase and recheck it after 2 weeks in such patient. And if you are having a clinical scenario of rejection in post-transplant period with this period, this time, then definitely you have to admit this patient and give them pulse steroid to control the rejection at that particular time, and then concomitantly increase the dose of tacrolimus at the same time, rechecking the TAC levels after a period of 2 weeks. That is what I do in my program.
Yes, sir. Sir, Dr. Manjunath from Hyderabad is asking, what are the parameters used to de-escalate immunosuppressant therapy after 6 months?
Immunosuppression protocols after 6 months. First, we most programs don't have this protocol biopsy, but if done, it's one good plan to do it. Another thing is doing the TAC levels of these patients. Routine screening includes your creatinine values, your urine routine values. I do check for ACR values because I have to check whether there is a worsening of ACR over the course of time in this post-transplant scenario. Then you have to check your sugars, your lipid profile, looking for side effect like neurotoxicity. But having said that, one pattern is to reduce your TAC level based on your tacrolimus doses based on your TAC level, and routine reduction in the steroid which we are following based on the clinical profile, urine profile, and a creatinine profile of the patient. If the hypertension is under control, all these things we have to look for when you are reducing the dose of. It varies from center to center with from experience to experience. Your decreasing in the dosage of your immunosuppression.
Yes. Sir, Dr. Bhartiya from Chennai, what is your point of view on everolimus for the renal replacement therapy?
That is what we had the discussion in the last few slides. Now, this is a very, if I tell you, this is frankly, this is a very underutilized drug today. And we have not received much experiences in the studies also. So, it is definitely a good choice in patients who are having toxicity to CNI, whose proteinurias are under control, whose GFR is around 35 to 40, more than that. And definitely it can be used in combination with low dose CNI, and it can, if the creatinine profile is good, you can switch over from CNI to everolimus from around 6 months onwards in various studies that can be used. So everolimus is an underutilized drug, but definitely over the course of time, it will definitely get more as we grow our experience with that. But definitely, if you talk about the immunosuppressive efficiency, then it is not a good choice. In those cases, CNI will definitely be a better choice for this patient. So a lot of things counts in the picture. Your cross-match results, your HLA cross-match, your level of matching, whether related, unrelated, cadaver. So all those things also adds to your profile, whether you want to continue with CNI or you can switch over from everolimus to everolimus.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Sir, Dr. Harish Kumar from Bangalore is asking, what is your view on use of valganciclovir in kidney transplant patient?
Valganciclovir, valganciclovir?
Yes, sir.
Valganciclovir we are using as a prophylaxis. We are giving for 100 days. So we are using as a prophylaxis, then CMV prophylaxis. Commonly we are using it. So far, didn't have any bad experience with that. but my experience is too small to share. I think I'll expect other panelists also, if they can also contribute something. But I had a smooth journey with ovarian cancer.
Okay. Sir, due to scarcity of the time, there is a last question from Dr. Agrawal from Calcutta. How can we manage the Zika virus?
Zika virus, you have to reduce IVIG therapy, and we can reduce the level of immunosuppression. It is a tough thing to manage, definitely. Then we can also switch to everolimus, reduce the level of steroids. Basically, it's infection which is gaining over your immunosuppression. That is what you are seeing in this picture. So that is how you can reduce. Initially, you can use IVIG and then reduce the level of immunosuppression, and then follow up this patient with your CMV PCR levels of vigilance.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Sir, lastly, I would like to request you, Dr. Kumar, to share your take-home message for today's session on perspective of the immunosuppressant in transplant recipient.
We have come in a big way, a long way, though right now we are facing difficult times, and hopefully we'll be coming back with the same speed how we were there before. Transplantation has evolved over last 50, 60 years, and now what we are seeing is what actually we have used over last 2 decades. We can actually modify on that. So it is up to your individual experiences how we can actually use a lot of combination of drug. Everolimus, as we discussed, that can be used more and more common frequently in our transplant programs, especially 6 months plus. So I'll request that have a good transplant protocols, and don't stick to one protocol. Try various studies, as per various studies, try different protocols which will best suit to your patient. One doesn't fit to all. That process should be there in your mind before you're choosing your patients for a particular program for transplantation. Protocol transplant program protocol program. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Bishway Kumar, and all participants. I would like to extend my thanks behalf of the Mylan for your valuable time to support our continuous scientific endeavor for better patient outcome. Thank you, sir. Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you very much.